The moment my daughter slid a cold plate of leftovers in front of me, I honestly thought she was joking. Everyone else at my granddaughter Olivia's birthday dinner had roast chicken, fresh vegetables, and warm bread. My plate held scraps, half a piece of meat, cold potatoes, and the ends of vegetables. I looked at Karen and quietly asked, "Is this mine?" She didn't even look embarrassed. She sipped her wine and said, "Mom, you should be grateful for scraps." The room went silent. My son-in-law lowered his eyes. My granddaughter froze with her fork in her hand. And at 67 years old, after spending my entire life sacrificing for my family, I realized something in that moment. My daughter believed I had become a burden. She had no idea that before the month was over, I would remove her from my will forever.
Before I tell you what happened, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touches your heart, consider liking and subscribing so we can spend more evenings together. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy knowing who is sitting beside me as I share my story. My name is Linda Harrison, and I was 67 years old when my daughter told me I should be grateful for scraps. People often ask how a mother reaches a moment like that. They imagine one terrible argument or one sudden betrayal. But families rarely break in a single day. They crack quietly. One disappointment at a time, one ignored phone call, one forgotten birthday, one painful silence. I live in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. It is the kind of place where neighbors still wave from their porches and people recognize your car at the grocery store. I have lived in the same White House for almost 40 years. My husband, Richard, and I bought it when Karen was only 3 years old. Back then, we had almost nothing. Richard worked long hours as a construction engineer. I worked as a school librarian at the local elementary school. Our salaries were modest, but we had dreams. Most of those dreams involved our daughter. Karen was our miracle child. After years of trying to have children, we finally brought her home on a rainy October afternoon. Richard held her in his arms and said, "Everything changes now." And it did. Every extra dollar went toward Karen. Every sacrifice had her name on it. I remember working evening shifts at the public library during the Christmas season because Karen wanted ballet lessons. Richard took weekend jobs because she needed braces. We skipped vacations so she could attend a better college. None of it felt like sacrifice at the time. It felt like love. Richard used to tell me, "One day, she'll understand everything we did." I believed him. Karen grew into a beautiful young woman. She was smart, ambitious, and kind. When she graduated from high school, she cried while hugging me. She said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you." I kept those words in my heart for years. When Karen left for Ohio State University, I cried for days. Richard pretended he wasn't emotional, but I saw him sitting in her empty bedroom more than once. She came home every weekend during her first year, then every month, then only during holidays. Life does that to children. I understood. After college, Karen found a marketing job in Columbus. She rented an apartment downtown and began building her own life. Richard and I were proud of her. When she introduced us to David Mitchell, we tried very hard to like him. He was handsome, confident, successful. At least that was the image he presented. David worked in sales. He drove expensive cars and wore expensive watches. He spoke about investments, business opportunities, and luxury neighborhoods. Richard once told me quietly, "Something about him worries me." I asked why. "He talks about money more than people." At the time, I thought my husband was being too protective. Karen fell deeply in love with David. They married 2 years later. Richard paid for most of the wedding. I remember him standing beside me during the reception. He smiled and said, "Our little girl is all grown up." Neither of us knew how quickly everything would change. About a year after the wedding, Olivia was born. She became the center of our lives. Richard adored his granddaughter. Every Saturday he took her to the park. He built a small swing set in our backyard. He taught her how to plant tomatoes in the garden. Those were happy years. Then Richard became sick. It started with fatigue, then pain, then doctors, then hospitals, cancer. The word shattered our family. For 18 months, I watched the strongest man I had ever known slowly disappear. Karen visited when she could. David came occasionally, but most days, it was just Richard and me. One night in the hospital, Richard held my hand. He said, "Promise me something." I asked. "What?" "Don't spend your life taking care of people who stop appreciating you." I laughed through my tears. "Karen would never do that." He smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." Richard died 8 years ago. The house became very quiet after that. For months, I slept on only one side of the bed. I left his coffee mug in the cabinet exactly where he had placed it. I couldn't move his jacket from the closet. Grief changes time. Days feel endless. Years disappear. Karen helped me after the funeral. She called often. She brought Olivia to visit. But slowly, life became busier for her. David changed jobs twice. They bought a larger house. Their expenses increased. Their conversations changed. Whenever Karen called, the subject often became money. "Mom, could you watch Olivia this weekend?" "Mom, can you lend us a little until next month?" "Mom, could you help with dance lessons?" And I always said yes, because mothers do. My retirement income wasn't large, but Richard had planned carefully. We had savings, investments, some accounts that few people knew about. Karen believed I lived entirely on Social Security. I never corrected her. Money was never something I discussed. What mattered to me was family. At least, that was what I told myself. My closest friend, Margaret Collins, often disagreed. Margaret lost her husband 3 years after Richard died. We met for coffee every Wednesday. One morning, she asked, "Does Karen ever help you?" I smiled. "She's busy." "Does she visit?" "Sometimes." "Does she ask how you're doing?" I didn't answer. Margaret stirred her coffee. "Linda, loving your children is one thing. Allowing yourself to disappear is another." I changed the subject. I wasn't ready to hear those words. Because if I admitted the truth, I would have to admit something far more painful. My daughter no longer needed me, and perhaps, little by little, she had stopped seeing me at all. I didn't know then
that the worst moment of my life was still ahead of me. I didn't know that one dinner table would change everything, and I certainly didn't know that my husband had been right all along. After Richard died, I told myself that grief was the reason Karen had changed. People handle loss differently. Some cry, some become quiet, some throw themselves into work. I convinced myself that my daughter simply needed time. But years passed. Time did not bring her closer. It carried her farther away. At first, the changes were small. Karen used to call every Sunday evening. Then it became every other Sunday. Then only when she needed something. One afternoon, she called while I was planting flowers in my front yard. "Mom, can you watch Olivia this weekend?" "Of course." "David and I have a business dinner. When should I pick her up?" There was a pause. "Actually, could you stay at our house? Olivia has dance practice Saturday morning." "Certainly. Thanks. Mom, you're a lifesaver." She hung up. No conversation. No questions about my health. No asking whether I had eaten or how I was sleeping. I stood there holding my phone. The call had lasted less than 2 minutes, but I still felt grateful. That was the dangerous thing about loneliness. You begin accepting very little because you are afraid of having nothing. David became more involved in Karen's decisions over the years. At first, he had been charming. He brought flowers. He complimented my cooking. He called me Mrs. Harrison. Then gradually, his tone changed. He became comfortable. Too comfortable. One Thanksgiving, while helping me carry dishes into the kitchen, he looked around my house. "This place must be worth quite a bit now." I smiled politely. "I suppose. You ever think about downsizing? I like living here." He shrugged. "Big houses are hard for older people." I remember those exact words. Older people, not Linda, not Mom, not family, just older people. Richard would have noticed immediately. He always saw things before I did. Another time, David asked me about my finances. "Are you set for retirement?" "I manage." "You have investments?" "Some." "What happens to everything eventually?" I laughed. "One day, Karen will know." He smiled. "I guess that's true." At the time, the conversation seemed harmless. Now I understand that some people ask questions because they care. Others ask because they are calculating. Karen changed in quieter ways. She became impatient. Everything felt rushed. When she visited, she checked her phone constantly. When I spoke, she sometimes interrupted. When I shared memories of Richard, she changed the subject. One afternoon, I invited Karen for lunch. I had made her favorite chicken salad. She arrived 20 minutes late. David stayed in the car. Karen sat at the kitchen table. She barely touched her food. "I can't stay long. Everything okay?" "We've had some expenses." I knew what was coming. She looked down. "David's business investment didn't work out." I nodded. "How much?" Her eyes filled with tears. 5,000. That was nearly 4 months of my retirement income. Still, I said yes, because she was my daughter. The next week, I transferred the money. She promised to repay me. She never did. Months later, I gently mentioned it. Karen looked surprised. Oh, right. Things are still tight. I smiled. It's okay. And it was. Until it wasn't. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was realizing that gratitude had disappeared. When Olivia was younger, she loved spending time with me. We baked cookies. We planted flowers. We watched old movies. She called me Grandma Linda. As she grew older, things changed. Teenagers pull away from everyone. I understood that, but sometimes I noticed phrases that didn't sound like Olivia. One afternoon she said, "Mom says you worry too much." Another day she said, "Dad says old houses are expensive." Once she asked, "Grandma, why don't you move somewhere smaller?" I looked at her. "Do you want me to?" She quickly shook her head. "No, I was just asking." I realized those thoughts had come from somewhere else. David and Karen often discussed me in front of her. Children absorb more than adults realize. One Wednesday morning, Margaret and I sat at our usual coffee shop. She studied my face. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep well." "What happened?" I hesitated. Then I told her about another request from Karen. She wanted me to pay for Olivia's summer program. Margaret sighed. "Linda, when was the last time your daughter did something for you?" I laughed softly. "Oh, she calls." "That's not what I asked." I stirred my coffee. The silence answered for me. Margaret leaned closer. "My son helped me repair my roof last month." "That's wonderful." He insisted. I nodded. She continued. "He said, 'Mom, you've done enough for us.'" Her words hurt. Not because she meant to hurt me, because I couldn't imagine Karen saying the same thing. That evening, I sat alone in my living room. Richard's photograph stood beside the fireplace. Sometimes I still talk to him. I know that sounds foolish, but grief never truly leaves. I looked at his picture. I think I'm losing her. The house was silent, but I remembered something he once said. "People show you who they are over time." Perhaps Karen had changed, or perhaps I had spent years refusing to see what was already there. A few weeks later, Karen invited me to dinner. It wasn't unusual. She occasionally called when she needed childcare or help, but this time her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Mom, Olivia's birthday is coming. 16 already." "I know. We're having a dinner at the house." "I'd love to come. Olivia wants family there." That sentence warmed my heart. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my kitchen. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe we had simply drifted apart for a while. Maybe this dinner would help us reconnect. I decided to make Olivia a handmade scrapbook. I spent several evenings sorting old photographs. Pictures of Richard teaching her to fish. Pictures of Karen as a child. Pictures of family vacations. I also prepared a small envelope. Inside was money I had saved for Olivia. Not much, but enough to show her that her grandmother believed in her future. Margaret visited one afternoon while I wrapped the gifts. She looked at the scrapbook. "It's beautiful. I hope Olivia likes it." "I'm sure she will." She paused. "And Karen." I smiled. "Maybe this dinner will be good for us." Margaret didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, "Just protect your heart." I laughed. She's my daughter. Margaret reached across the table. That doesn't always protect us. At the time, I thought she was being pessimistic. I wish she had been wrong, because only a few days later, I would sit at my daughter's dining table and hear words that would change my life forever. Olivia's 16th birthday fell on a Saturday in early October. For nearly 2 weeks, I worked on her gift. I spread old photographs across my dining room table. There were pictures of Richard holding Olivia as a baby, pictures of Karen in pigtails, pictures from camping trips, Christmas mornings, and family barbecues. I bought a large scrapbook and carefully arranged every memory. Under one photograph of Richard teaching Olivia to ride a bicycle, I wrote, "Your grandfather loved you from the moment he held you." Under another picture of Karen at age 10, I wrote, "Your mother once laughed exactly like you." I wanted Olivia to remember where she came from. Young people sometimes believe life begins with them. I wanted her to know that she belonged to something larger. Inside a small envelope, I placed $500. It had taken me months to save. I wrote a short note. "For your dreams. Love. Grandma." The morning of the party, I woke up earlier than usual, for reasons I could not explain. I felt nervous. I made coffee and sat alone in the kitchen. Richard's photograph stood near the window. "Wish me luck," I said softly. At 10 o'clock, Margaret called. "You ready?" "I think so." "How are you feeling?" I looked out at the backyard. "Hopeful." She was quiet. "Just remember that hope can make us ignore things." I laughed. "You really don't trust Karen anymore." "It's not about trust. It's about patterns." I didn't want to discuss it. I changed the subject. At 3 o'clock, I dressed carefully. I wore the blue sweater Richard had always liked, and a pearl necklace he gave me on our 30th anniversary. When you get older, you learn that people stop noticing you. Still, part of me wanted my daughter to look at me and see her mother again. The drive to Karen's house took about 30 minutes. The neighborhood was much more expensive than mine. Large houses, perfect lawns, luxury cars. David cared deeply about appearances. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed several cars already parked outside. The party had started. I carried the scrapbook and the envelope to the front door. Karen opened it. "Oh, Mom, you're here." She hugged me quickly, very quickly. Not cold, not warm, just automatic. I smiled. "You look beautiful." "Thanks. Come in." The house was full. Music played quietly. Several of David's business friends stood near the kitchen island holding wine glasses. I recognized only a few people. Olivia came running toward me. "Grandma." For a moment, everything felt normal. She hugged me tightly. "I thought you weren't coming yet." "I wouldn't miss your 16th birthday." She smiled. She still had Richard's eyes. I handed her the scrapbook. "What's this? Open it later?" She hugged me again. "Thank you." Those few seconds meant more to me than she could ever know. David walked over. "Linda." He shook my hand. Not a hug, just a handshake. "Good to see you." "You too." His eyes moved briefly toward the envelope. I noticed. Perhaps I imagined it
Perhaps I didn't. As the afternoon continued, I stayed mostly near the living room. Karen seemed busy, very busy. She moved from guest to guest. She laughed loudly. She poured drinks. She introduced David to people. Several times I thought she might sit beside me. She never did. At one point, I carried empty glasses into the kitchen to help. Karen immediately said, "Mom, you don't have to do that. I don't mind. We've got it." Her voice wasn't rude, but it felt dismissive, as if I had become a guest instead of family. Later, I found Olivia upstairs in her room. She was opening presents. "Do you like the scrapbook?" Her eyes were wet. "It's beautiful." She turned pages carefully. "I miss Grandpa." "So do I." She pointed to one picture. "I don't remember this." "That was your first fishing trip." She smiled. For a few minutes, I felt peace. Then Karen entered the room. "Olivia, people are asking for you downstairs." She looked at me. "Dinner will be ready soon?" I nodded. "Wonderful." As we walked downstairs, I noticed something strange. Most of the guests sat at the dining table. Additional chairs had been placed nearby, but there weren't enough seats. David was rearranging them. Karen spoke quietly with him. He shook his head. She looked irritated. I couldn't hear the conversation. Eventually, everyone found a place. Except me. Karen looked around. "Oh." She pulled a small chair from the corner. "You can sit here." "Mom." The chair sat slightly away from the table, near the kitchen entrance, almost like an extra seat. I forced a smile. "That's fine." Dinner was served buffet style. People lined up. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, salad. The food smelled wonderful. I remained seated. Several guests returned with full plates. Karen carried plates to some older visitors. I assumed she would bring mine. She disappeared into the kitchen. Minutes passed. People began eating. I looked toward Karen. She was talking with David, then laughing with guests. Finally, she walked toward me. She carried a plate. At first, I couldn't see it clearly. Then she placed it in front of me. Half a chicken breast, cold potatoes, vegetables scraped together from serving dishes. No bread, no salad. The food looked like leftovers. I stared at the plate. Perhaps she had made a mistake. I looked up. "Karen." She seemed impatient. "What? Is this mine?" She folded her arms. "Yes." I lowered my voice. "I think maybe you brought me the wrong plate." David looked away. The room suddenly felt quiet. Karen sighed. Her expression hardened. And in that moment, I saw something I had never seen in my daughter before. Annoyance, embarrassment, perhaps resentment. Then she said the words that would change everything. "Mom, you should be grateful for scraps." The entire table became silent. I heard someone put down a fork. Olivia stared at her mother. David looked at his wine glass. I felt my face grow warm. For 67 years, I had been many things: wife, mother, caretaker, widow, grandmother. But I had never been humiliated by my own child. Not until that moment. And sitting there with a plate of leftovers in front of me, I suddenly understood something. This dinner was not an accident, and my daughter no longer saw me as family. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The sound of silverware disappeared. Even the music in the background seemed far away. I looked at Karen, waiting for her to smile, to tell me she was joking, to realize what she had just said. She didn't. Her face remained cold. "Mom," she said, "everyone already ate. There wasn't enough left." I looked around the table. There was food everywhere. Half a tray of potatoes sat near the kitchen. Bread remained untouched. Several serving dishes were still full. She knew I could see them. David cleared his throat. "Karen," she interrupted him. "What, I'm just being honest." Olivia stared at her mother. "Mom, Grandma can have mine." Karen immediately shook her head. "No, sit down and eat." I felt every pair of eyes on me. One of David's friends looked embarrassed. His wife quietly lowered her head. Nobody knew what to say. And honestly, neither did I. For 67 years, I had solved problems. I had comforted sick children, buried my husband, worked extra jobs, paid bills, managed grief. But I did not know how to respond when my own daughter treated me like an inconvenience. I looked down at the plate. The potatoes were cold. The chicken had been cut in half. The vegetables looked scraped from the bottom of a serving bowl. It wasn't about the food. I want people to understand that. I grew up during difficult years. I knew what it meant to eat leftovers. Richard and I had struggled financially when Karen was young. Food never embarrassed me. Disrespect did. I quietly placed my napkin on the table. Karen frowned. "What are you doing?" I looked directly at her. "I'm going home." "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic." Those words hurt almost as much as the others. Dramatic. As if my pain were entertainment. As if humiliation were an overreaction. David finally spoke. "Linda, maybe sit down." I turned toward him. "No." Olivia stood up. "Grandma." I smiled at her. "It's okay, sweetheart." Karen crossed her arms. Seriously, I picked up my purse. For the first time all evening, my voice felt steady. "I hope Olivia has a wonderful birthday." Karen shook her head. "You're leaving over food." I looked at her. "No." The room was silent again. "I'm leaving because my daughter just told me I should be grateful for scraps." Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. Nobody defended me either. I walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Karen speak. "Mom, you're embarrassing me." I stopped. Those words settled into my chest. Embarrassing her. Not hurting me. Not insulting me. Embarrassing her. I slowly turned around. For the first time in years, I truly looked at my daughter. Her expensive clothes.
her perfect dining room, her carefully decorated house. And I realized something. She was afraid. Not of losing me, of looking bad in front of her guests. I said quietly, "Good night, Karen." Then I left. The October air felt cold. My hands trembled as I walked to my car. I placed my purse on the passenger seat. For several moments, I simply sat there. I could see people moving inside the house. Nobody came outside. Not Karen. Not David. Not even Olivia. Perhaps Karen had told everyone to stay inside. Perhaps nobody knew what to do. I started the engine. Then my phone rang. It was Margaret. I almost didn't answer. "Hello." She immediately heard my voice. "What happened?" I began crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that had waited years to appear. Margaret listened. I told her everything. The plate, the words, the silence. When I finished, she didn't speak for several seconds. Then she said quietly, "Come over." "I'm okay." "No, you're not. I don't want to bother you. You spent your entire life taking care of other people. Linda, let someone take care of you." I drove to her house. She opened the door before I even reached the porch. The smell of soup filled the kitchen. She sat me at her table. Unlike Karen's house, Margaret's kitchen felt warm. Safe. She poured tea. I finally said the words aloud. "My daughter hates me." Margaret shook her head. "No." "Then why?" "Because people who hate you don't spend years asking for your help." I looked at her. "Then what is it?" She sighed. "Entitlement." The word settled heavily between us. "She believes you will always stay." I stared into my tea. Maybe I deserve it. Margaret almost became angry. "No." "I should have spoken up years ago." "Yes." "I should have set boundaries." "Yes." "I should have said no." She nodded. "But none of that means you deserve to be humiliated." For the first time that evening, I felt anger. Not toward Karen, toward myself. Because I suddenly remembered dozens of moments I had ignored. The money, the demands, the dismissive comments, David asking about my house, Karen forgetting birthdays, missed calls, canceled visits, years of small wounds. And I had explained every one of them away. Because mothers do that. We translate disappointment into excuses. We call neglect being busy. We call selfishness stress. We call disrespect a bad day. Around 10 o'clock. I returned home. The house felt unusually quiet. Richard's photograph still sat beside the fireplace. I stood in front of it. "You were right." His smile in the picture never changed. I walked upstairs. In my bedroom closet sat a small safe. Richard had installed it years earlier. Inside were documents, insurance papers, investment statements, retirement accounts, and our will. The will had been prepared shortly after Richard's diagnosis. Everything passed to me. After my death, almost everything would go to Karen. I removed the folder. I sat at the kitchen table.
For nearly an hour, I stared at it. I remembered Richard's voice. Don't spend your life taking care of people who stop appreciating you. At 11:30, my phone rang. Karen. I watched it ring, then stop. A minute later, another call. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Mom, I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. Call me. No apology, no concern, only irritation. 10 minutes later, another message. You're upsetting Olivia. Still nothing. Not one word saying I'm sorry. I sat quietly. The house was dark. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside the safe sat decades of work. Richard's work, my work, our sacrifices. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I never imagined asking. What happens when your own child stops deserving your trust? I opened the folder. I found the will, and before midnight, I made a decision that would change every life in my family. The next morning, I called our attorney. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For years, Richard had always been the first one awake. He would make coffee and read the newspaper while I stayed in bed for another 10 minutes. Even after 8 years, my body still expected to hear him downstairs. Instead, the house was silent. I sat at the kitchen table with the old will in front of me. Karen's voicemail still played in my mind. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. Not once had she said she was sorry. Not once had she asked if I was hurt. I poured coffee and looked at Richard's photograph. Am I overreacting? I asked him. Of course. Photographs never answer. But memories do. Suddenly, I remembered something that happened 3 years earlier. Karen had invited me to dinner. During the meal, David had asked, "Have you ever thought about selling the house?" I had laughed. "No." He smiled. "You could buy a condo," Karen added. "It would probably be easier for you." At the time, I thought they were worried about me. Now I wasn't so sure. Another memory appeared. 2 years earlier, David walking through my living room. "This neighborhood has gone up in value," Karen saying. "Mom doesn't need all this space." Me laughing, changing the subject, ignoring the feeling in my stomach. The signs had always been there. I simply refused to see them. At 9 o'clock, I called Daniel Brooks. Daniel had been Richard's attorney for nearly 30 years. He handled our wills, retirement documents, and estate planning. He also attended Richard's funeral. When he heard my voice, he sounded surprised. "Linda." "Good morning, Daniel. Everything all right?" I looked down at the documents. "No." He became quiet. "Would you like to come in?" "Today?" "Of course." His office sat 20 minutes away in downtown Columbus. The entire drive. I questioned myself. Perhaps I was acting emotionally. Perhaps I should wait. Perhaps Karen would apologize. Perhaps families deserved second chances. Then I remembered the plate, the words, the silence. And suddenly, my doubt disappeared. Daniel greeted me personally. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, thicker glasses. But his kindness had not changed. He led me into his office. "Coffee, please." After he closed the door, he sat across from me. What happened? And for the second time in 24 hours, I told the story. He listened carefully. When I finished, he folded his hands. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "So am I." He looked toward the will on his desk. "Are you here because of this?" "Yes." Daniel remained quiet. Good attorneys do not rush people. They wait. Finally, he asked, "Are you certain?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know." "Then let's talk first." For nearly an hour, we discussed my life, my relationship with Karen, Richard's death, David, Olivia, the birthday dinner. At one point, Daniel said something that surprised me. "Richard worried about this." I looked up. "What do you mean?" He opened a file cabinet. He removed an old folder. "During one of your estate meetings, Richard mentioned that Karen and David seemed overly interested in finances." I felt my chest tighten. "He said that." Daniel nodded. "He asked me to make sure you understood your options in the future." I stared at him. Richard had seen it, years before I had. Daniel continued. "He loved Karen, but he worried that people sometimes confuse love with obligation." I suddenly felt tears. Even after his death, my husband was still trying to protect me. Daniel opened another folder. "Linda, before you make any decisions, there is something you should understand." I frowned. "What?" He turned several pages toward me. Most of the financial information had always been handled by Richard and Daniel together. I knew we were comfortable, but I had never truly looked at the numbers. Daniel pointed. "The investment accounts have performed extremely well." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your estate is considerably larger than you realize." He continued showing documents. Stocks, retirement funds, land Richard had purchased years ago, investment accounts, life insurance, savings. I sat speechless. You thought your house was your primary asset." "Yes." Daniel smiled gently. "It isn't." I looked at the papers. The total number stunned me. Karen had always treated me as if I lived on a fixed retirement income, as if I barely managed each month. The truth was very different. Richard had planned carefully, very carefully. And suddenly, another memory returned. David asking questions. Repeated questions. About retirement. About savings. About the house. Had he known, or had he simply suspected Daniel interrupted my thoughts? "Does Karen know the value of your estate?" "No." "David?" "No." He nodded. "Perhaps that is wise." I sat quietly. The office suddenly felt very warm. Daniel spoke carefully. "You have several options." "I know." "You can leave things exactly as they are." I nodded. "You can reduce Karen's inheritance." Another nod. "You can create trusts." "Trusts?" "For Olivia." I looked up. "Can money be protected?" "Yes." He explained various possibilities. "Educational trusts?" age restrictions, protected distributions, charitable donations. The conversation lasted another hour. For the first time since Richard died, I felt something unexpected. Control. I had spent years reacting, helping, giving, apologizing, sacrificing. But now I realized something. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Protecting Richard's work. Protecting my dignity. Protecting Olivia. Daniel finally asked, "What do you want?" I answered immediately. "I don't want David touching a single dollar." He smiled slightly. "Understood. And I don't want Karen receiving money simply because she's my daughter." "Also understood." The words surprised even me, because they were true. Love and inheritance are not the same thing. When the meeting ended, Daniel scheduled another appointment. "We don't have to decide everything today." I stood. "Actually, I think I know." He looked at me. I said quietly, "Karen believes all I have is this house." Daniel nodded. "She may be very surprised." I drove home feeling strangely calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of disappointing my daughter. When I entered my house, my phone showed 3 missed calls. Karen. Another voicemail. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Olivia is upset. Please call me." Still no apology. Still no concern. Only frustration. I deleted the message. That evening, I sat in Richard's chair. Outside. Autumn leaves blew across the yard. Inside. I opened the safe again. This time, I didn't see paperwork. I saw 40 years of work, 40 years of sacrifice, 40 years of love. And I finally understood something. Karen thought my inheritance was automatic. She thought being my daughter guaranteed everything. But respect matters. Gratitude matters. Character matters. And before the week ended, I would make a decision that nobody in my family saw coming. For the next 3 days, Karen called 7 times. I answered none of them. That may sound cruel. Perhaps it was. But for the first time in my life, I wanted my daughter to experience silence. The same silence I had lived with for years. Each voicemail sounded different. The first was irritated. "Mom, call me back." The second was defensive. "I think you're overreacting." The third was angry. "Olivia keeps asking what happened." The fourth finally sounded worried. "Mom, please answer." Still, there was no apology. Not one. I spent those days walking through my house. The kitchen, the living room, Richard's workshop, our bedroom. Every room held memories. And every memory reminded me that nothing in this house had appeared by accident. Richard worked 60-hour weeks. I worked evenings. We skipped vacations. We drove old cars. We saved every extra dollar. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts. Everything had been built slowly, brick by brick, year by year. One afternoon, Margaret visited. She brought soup. As usual, she placed the container on the counter. "Any word from Karen?" I nodded. Several messages. You answer, no. She looked surprised. Good. I laughed. I never thought you'd say that. Margaret sat down. Linda, your entire life has been about making other people comfortable. I poured coffee. And now it's your turn. I sat across from her. What if I'm making a mistake? She thought for a moment. Do you want revenge? No. Do you want to hurt Karen? No. What do you want? I answered honestly. I want respect. Margaret nodded. Then you're not making a mistake. The next morning, I returned to Daniel's office. This time, I felt calmer. The shock had disappeared. Only clarity remained. Daniel greeted me with several folders already prepared. I've outlined a few options. I sat down. He opened the first file. You could reduce Karen's inheritance. The second, you could place everything in a trust. The third, you could remove Karen entirely. The words sounded harsh. Remove Karen entirely. Even hearing them hurt. Daniel watched my expression. You don't have to decide immediately. I looked out the office window. Cars moved through downtown traffic. People hurried to work. Life continued. Meanwhile, my entire world had changed because of one sentence. You should be grateful for scraps. I looked back at Daniel. What would Richard have done? Daniel smiled slightly. Richard loved Karen. I know. He also believed actions have consequences. That sounded exactly like my husband. Richard had never raised his voice. He never needed to. His disappointment was enough. I opened one of the financial reports. How much is everything worth? Daniel adjusted his glasses. Approximately 3.8 million. I stared at him. I knew we were comfortable. I knew Richard had invested carefully. But I had never imagined that number. $3.8 million. The house represented only a fraction. There were investment accounts. Land Richard purchased 20 years earlier. Retirement funds. Stock portfolios. Life insurance. Karen believed she would inherit an old house. She had no idea. Daniel spoke carefully. Your daughter does not appear to understand your actual financial situation. Mom, I almost laughed. No. And David, I don't know. But suddenly, I remembered several conversations. David asking about retirement. David asking about investments. David asking whether I had updated my will. At the time, I thought he was making conversation. Now, I wondered. Daniel slid another folder toward me. This is an educational trust. I looked down. For Olivia? Yes. The details were simple. Funds could pay for college, graduate school, medical needs, housing assistance. But the money would remain protected. Neither Karen nor David could access it. I felt relief, because no matter what happened with Karen, I still loved Olivia. Can she receive it at 25? Certainly. Not before. Daniel nodded. He wrote notes. Then I asked another question. What about charities? He looked surprised. What kind? I thought about Margaret. about the widows I met at church, about older women abandoned by their families, women who sat alone, women who apologized for needing help, women who became invisible. I want to help elderly women. Daniel smiled. Richard would like that. I felt tears in my eyes. Perhaps he would. For nearly 2 hours, we worked. Trusts, documents, legal language, decisions, for the first time in years. I felt strong, not angry, not bitter, strong. Before I left, Daniel asked one final question. What percentage do you want Karen to inherit? The room became quiet. I looked down at my hands. Hands that had packed school lunches. Hands that had sewn Halloween costumes. Hands that had held Karen when she cried. Hands that had worked extra jobs to pay her tuition. Hands that had cared for Richard while he died. I thought about the birthday dinner, the plate, the words, the lack of apology. I looked at Daniel. Nothing. He did not react. Good lawyers don't judge. He simply asked, Are you certain? I nodded. Yes. He wrote the instructions. My daughter would no longer inherit my estate. Instead, Olivia would receive protected educational funds at age 25. Several charities would receive donations. A foundation supporting elderly women would receive funding. The local library, where I had worked for 30 years, would receive a gift. The house could eventually be sold to support those decisions. Karen would receive a personal letter. Nothing else. Daniel put down his pen. How do you feel? I expected sadness. Instead, I felt peace. Real peace. Because, for the first time since Richard died, I was no longer living out of guilt. I was living out of truth. When I returned home, another voicemail waited. This one from Karen. Her voice sounded softer. Mom, please talk to me. I sat in my kitchen. I listened carefully. Then her tone changed. David thinks this has gone far enough. David thinks. Not Karen feels. Not Mom. I'm sorry. David thinks. Suddenly, everything became clear. Perhaps Karen had changed gradually. Perhaps David had encouraged it. Perhaps both were true. But one thing was certain. My daughter no longer saw me as a mother. She saw me as an obligation. And somewhere in that equation, my future had become a financial asset. That evening, I signed the first documents. My hand trembled slightly. Not because I doubted myself, because I finally understood that some decisions cannot be undone. The woman who entered that birthday dinner had spent years begging to be appreciated. The woman signing those papers no longer needed permission to value herself. A week after I signed the first documents, I returned to Daniel's office. This time, the decisions became real. Paper has a strange power. Thoughts remain private. Conversations disappear. But signatures change lives. Daniel placed several folders on the table. The trust documents are ready. I nodded. And the charitable foundation, prepared. I looked down at the papers. For nearly 40 years, Richard and I had built our future together. Now I was deciding where that future would go after I was gone. The responsibility felt heavy, but it also felt right. Daniel opened the first folder. This educational trust is for Olivia. He explained every detail. The funds would cover college tuition, graduate school if she wanted it, medical emergencies, housing assistance, professional training. But there were conditions. She would not receive direct control until age 25. No one else could access the money. Not Karen. Not David. Only Olivia. I smiled. Richard would approve. Daniel nodded. He absolutely would. I signed the document slowly. Each signature felt like an act of protection. Not punishment. Protection. The second folder contained donations. The local library where I had worked for 32 years. A scholarship fund. Several programs helping elderly women. One organization provided housing for widows. Another offered legal assistance to older adults facing financial abuse. Daniel looked surprised. You've thought carefully about this. I folded my hands. I've had many lonely years. He understood. As people age, they become invisible, especially women, especially widows. I had watched friends lose their husbands and then slowly disappear. Children moved away. Families became busy. Phone calls stopped. Visits became holidays, and somehow older people began apologizing for existing. I never wanted that for myself, and I never wanted my money rewarding people who treated me like an inconvenience. After we finished the paperwork, Daniel became serious. There is one final question. I looked up. Would you like Karen informed immediately? I thought for several seconds. No. Are you sure? Yes. I wasn't hiding. I simply wasn't ready. Karen had still not apologized. Her calls had become less frequent. Only 2 messages during the past week. The last one said, Mom, David thinks we should all sit down and talk. David again. Always David. Not Mom. I hurt you. Not Mom. I'm sorry. Only David thinks. Daniel closed the files. Then the documents remained private. I thanked him and drove home. That afternoon, Olivia called. My heart immediately softened. Grandma. Her voice sounded nervous. Hello, sweetheart. Can I ask you something? Of course. There was a long pause. Are you mad at me? My eyes filled with tears. No. Mom says you're upset. I'm upset with adults. Another pause. I didn't know what to say that night. I know. I wanted to come after you. I closed my eyes. Why didn't you? Her answer broke my heart. Mom told me to stay inside. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I suddenly pictured Olivia standing near the dining room, watching me leave, wanting to follow, being told to stay. Grandma, yes? I'm sorry. No, sweetheart. I should have said something. I wiped my eyes. You don't need to apologize for your mother's choices. She sounded relieved. Can I come visit sometime? I smiled. Anytime. After we hung up,
I sat quietly in the living room. For the first time since the birthday dinner, I felt hope, because Olivia still cared. The next day, Margaret came over. I told her about the phone call. She smiled. Children see more than adults think. I don't want Olivia caught in the middle. She already is. I knew she was right. Families often force children to carry burdens that adults create. And I worried about Olivia. David cared deeply about money. Karen cared deeply about pleasing David. What would happen when they discovered the truth that evening? I opened one of Richard's old journals. He rarely wrote. But after his cancer diagnosis, he had started keeping notes. Most pages discussed treatments, appointments, pain. But one entry stopped me. It had been written 6 months before he died. Karen loves us, but she worries too much about appearances. David worries too much about money. I hope Linda remembers that kindness matters more than inheritance. I read the words 3 times. Richard had known. Not everything, but enough. Enough to worry. Enough to write it down. Enough to try protecting me. I pressed the journal against my chest. Sometimes, love continues long after people leave us. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. A large bouquet of flowers. The card read, "We need to talk. Love, Karen." I stared at the flowers. No apology. Again. Only, "We need to talk." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I love you." Margaret laughed when she saw them. Negotiation flowers. What? People send apology flowers. She pointed. These are negotiation flowers. I smiled despite myself, because she was probably right. That night, my phone rang again. Karen. This time, I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she said, "Mom." "Hello?" Her voice sounded cautious. "Can we meet?" "Why?" Another silence. "I don't like this." "Neither do I." "Mom, we're family." I looked around my empty living room. Family. The word sounded different now. "I know." "Can we have dinner?" I almost laughed. Dinner, after what happened. Instead, I said, "Not yet." She sounded frustrated. "How long are you going to do this?" I answered honestly. "Until you understand what happened." I said something stupid. "No." She became quiet. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "You told me exactly how you see me." She didn't answer, because somewhere deep down, she knew I was right. Before ending the call, she said something that stayed with me. "David says this has gone too far." Again. David. Always David. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark. For the first time, I began wondering something. Why was David so involved? Why was he so concerned? Why did every conversation return to him? Perhaps the answer had nothing to do with me. Perhaps it had everything to do with money. And perhaps my daughter didn't yet understand how much trouble her husband was really in. 3 days after my phone call with Karen, a certified letter arrived. At first, I thought it came from the bank.
Instead, it came from Daniel's office, exactly as we had discussed. The letter was simple. It informed Karen that her mother's estate plan had been revised and that certain previous provisions no longer existed. It did not explain details. It did not mention money. It did not mention Olivia's trust. But it was enough, because 2 hours later, my phone began ringing. Karen. Then again. And again. By evening. She had called 6 times. I did not answer. At 8 o'clock, my front doorbell rang. I looked through the window. Karen stood on my porch. Alone. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but running from my daughter felt wrong. I opened the door. Her face was pale. "Mom!" I stepped aside. She entered quietly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. My own daughter seemed like a stranger. She finally sat down. "I got a letter." "I know." She looked at me carefully. "What does it mean?" I folded my hands. "It means I changed my estate plans." She blinked. "You changed your will?" "Yes." The room became silent. She looked genuinely shocked. Not angry yet. Just shocked. "Why?" I looked at her. "Karen, you know why." She immediately looked away. "I said something terrible." "Yes." She swallowed. "I was stressed." I remained quiet. "David and I have been dealing with a lot." Again. David, stress, circumstances, everything except responsibility. I asked softly, "Have you ever wondered how I've been doing?" She looked confused. "What? Since your father died?" She said nothing. "Have you ever wondered whether I get lonely?" Still silence. "Have you ever asked if I needed help?" Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Mom." "No." For the first time in years. I interrupted her. "You've asked me for money." She lowered her eyes. "You've asked me for babysitting." No answer. "You've asked me for favors." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But you stopped asking about me a long time ago." She whispered. "That's not true." "It is." The words hurt both of us. I could see it. Karen looked around the living room. The old photographs. Richard's chair. The bookshelf. The family pictures. Perhaps she was seeing the house differently. Perhaps she was seeing me differently. "Did you leave me out completely?" There it was. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we fix this?" The real question. I answered honestly. "Yes." She stared at me. For several seconds. She could not speak. Finally, she whispered, "Mom." I felt tears forming. Because despite everything, she was still my daughter. The little girl who once held my hand. The young woman who cried at graduation. The new mother who brought Olivia home. But she was also the woman who told me to be grateful for scraps. Both things were true. Karen shook her head. "This is because of one dinner." "No!" I looked directly at her. This is because of years. That sentence seemed to hit her. Years. Not one night. Years. She covered her face. I didn't realize. I believed her. Partially. People often do not realize the damage they cause when someone keeps forgiving them. She finally looked up. What happens now? I took a deep breath. That depends on you. Me. Yes. She seemed confused. I continued. You have spent years believing that loving you meant giving you everything, she said quietly. You're my mother. Yes. And you're my daughter. She looked at me. But being family doesn't mean we stop treating each other with respect. She began crying again. For a moment, I almost reached for her hand. Almost. Then I remembered the dining room, the plate, the silence. I remained still. Karen wiped her eyes. David is furious. I wasn't surprised. What did he say? She hesitated. He thinks you're punishing us. Us. Not me. Not Karen. Us. I asked carefully. Why is David so concerned? She looked away. Another silence. A longer one. Finally, she said, his business isn't doing well. I waited. He invested money. How much? She shook her head. I don't know. I did not believe that. Not completely. Karen had always known more than she admitted. Are you in debt? She didn't answer. That answer was enough. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, several conversations made sense. David asking about investments, the house, my retirement, my will, the questions, the interest, the concern. I asked quietly. Did David expect you to inherit money? Karen began crying again. I don't know. But this time, I knew she was lying. Perhaps not entirely. Perhaps even to herself. But somewhere inside her, she understood. She had counted on my future, and David had counted on it too. After a long silence, she asked the question I had expected. Can you change it back? There it was. The question. The reason she came. I looked at my daughter. I saw fear, guilt, regret, but I also saw panic, financial panic. I answered gently. No. She stared at me. What? I won't. She looked devastated. You mean never? I don't know. The truth was even harder. At that moment, I truly did not know. Because trust does not return simply because someone asks. Karen stood and walked toward the window. I can't believe this, I said quietly. I couldn't believe your words either. The room became silent again. Eventually, she picked up her purse. She looked older, smaller somehow. Before leaving, she turned around. Olivia misses you. I smiled sadly. I miss her too. Can she visit? Anytime. She nodded. Then she asked one final question. Do you still love me? My eyes filled with tears. Because mothers never stop loving, no matter how badly their hearts break. Yes, she cried. Then why are you doing this? I answered with the truth. Because I finally learned to love myself too. Karen left. The house became quiet again. But something had changed. For the first time, my daughter understood that this situation was real, very real, and somewhere across town. David Mitchell was beginning to realize that the inheritance he expected might never arrive. 2 days after Karen left my house, David came. He did not call first. He did not ask permission. At 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked through the window. David stepped out of his black SUV. Immediately, I felt uneasy. Karen usually softened difficult conversations. David did the opposite. He sharpened them. I considered not opening the door, but hiding inside my own house felt wrong. When I opened it, he smiled. "Linda?" I did not smile back. "David." He held a box of pastries. "I thought we could talk." I stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around the house as if he hadn't been there dozens of times before. Nothing had changed. The furniture, the photographs, Richard's chair. Yet somehow, the house felt different. Because I had changed. David sat down. He placed the pastries on the coffee table. "I know things have been difficult." I remained standing. "Have they?" He forced a small laugh. "Karen is devastated." I finally sat down. "Is she?" "She hasn't been sleeping." Neither had I. But no one had asked. David folded his hands. "I think this has gone too far." There it was again, the same phrase, as if grief had a deadline, as if humiliation expired. I looked at him carefully. "What exactly has gone too far?" He hesitated. "The will." I felt something inside me become very still. Not the birthday dinner, not Karen's words, not our broken relationship. The will. I asked quietly. "That's why you're here." He leaned forward. "Karen made a mistake." "She did?" "People say things." "They do." "Families forgive." I nodded. "Sometimes." He sighed. "Linda, this is becoming permanent." I looked at him. So was what Karen said. His jaw tightened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that surprised me. "Karen assumed certain things." I kept my voice calm. "What things?" He looked uncomfortable. "The future." I almost laughed. The future. Such a polite word. Inheritance, money, assets, security, all hidden behind one simple word. I asked, "Did you assume things too?" His expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He stood and walked toward the window. "Karen is your daughter." "Yes." "And families take care of each other." I looked at Richard's photograph. "Families respect each other too." David turned. "You're punishing her." I felt anger rise for the first time. Real anger. "No," What else would you call it? I stood. I call it consequences. His face hardened. Because of one sentence, I looked directly into his eyes. No, because of years. Exactly the same words I had spoken to Karen. Years. Years of asking. Years of taking. Years of assuming. Years of forgetting that mothers are people too. David crossed his arms. You're making a mistake. That sentence struck me because it sounded less like concern and more like fear. I asked quietly, how much money did you lose? His eyes widened. What? Your business? He looked away. I don't know what you're talking about. Karen told me things aren't going well. He remained silent. How much? His voice became colder. That's none of your business. I almost smiled. My inheritance had apparently become his business. But his debts were private. Interesting. I walked toward the kitchen. I needed distance. David followed me. Karen loves you. I turned. Then why didn't she apologize? He looked surprised. She did. No. She feels terrible. Then why did she ask about the will? He didn't answer. Because he knew. We both knew. I continued. She asked if I would change it back. He remained silent. She didn't ask how I was sleeping. Still nothing. She didn't ask if I was lonely. His eyes dropped. She asked about the money. David finally became frustrated. Because she's scared. Of what? He answered too quickly. Losing everything. The words hung between us. Losing everything. Not losing me. Not losing family. Everything. Money. Assets. Expectations. I suddenly understood something. Karen had always assumed the inheritance existed. David had planned around it. Perhaps they both had. Maybe not consciously, but enough to depend on it. I asked quietly. Did you borrow money, expecting it? His face changed. Only for a second. But it was enough. I knew. He sat down again. His confidence had disappeared. Finally, he spoke honestly. My company had problems. I waited. We invested in expansion. How much? He rubbed his forehead. A lot. How much? Almost 300,000. My heart stopped. $300,000. I sat slowly. Karen had never mentioned anything close to that. David continued. We'll recover. Are you in debt? He didn't answer. I suddenly remembered Richard. His concerns. His warnings. His intuition. David spoke again. We thought eventually. He stopped. But he had already said enough. We thought eventually. Eventually. The inheritance. The future. The plan. Everything suddenly became clear. I looked directly at him. You expected my money? No. Yes. He became defensive. We never. David. He stopped talking. For the first time since he entered my house, He looked uncertain, almost frightened. I said quietly, "Did Karen know?" He looked away. And that answer hurt more than anything, because somewhere inside my daughter, she had expected it too. Maybe not greed, maybe not intentionally, but expectation. And expectation destroys gratitude. After several minutes, David stood. His voice softened. "Karen doesn't know I came here." I wasn't surprised. "Why did you—" He hesitated. Then he finally told me the truth. "Because we're in trouble." The room became silent. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the birthday dinner, the way he had lowered his eyes, the way he had said nothing, the way he had watched my humiliation. He had a chance to speak. He chose silence, just as Karen had. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Please think about this." I answered honestly, "I have." At the door, he turned around. "Karen loves you." I looked at him. Then she needs to learn that love isn't measured by inheritance. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees. Inside, everything finally made sense. The questions, the pressure, the interest in my finances, the concern about my house, the sudden panic. David wasn't afraid of losing a mother-in-law. He was afraid of losing an investment. And somewhere across town, my daughter still hadn't realized that the greatest thing she had already lost wasn't money. It was my trust. After David left my house, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. We're in trouble. Not Karen is hurting. Not our family is falling apart. Only we're in trouble. For several days, I heard nothing. No phone calls, no messages, no flowers. The silence felt different this time. It wasn't peaceful. It felt like people were preparing for something. Margaret noticed it too. One morning, we sat together at our usual coffee shop. She stirred her tea and said, "Something's coming." I smiled. "You sound like a weather report." She shook her head. "No, I know people." I looked out the window. David came to the house. She nearly dropped her cup. He did what— I told her everything. The debt, the business problems, the inheritance, his visit. Margaret listened carefully. When I finished, she leaned back. "He expected your money." "I think so." "No." She shook her head. "He counted on your money." Those words felt different. Expected. Counted on. One is hope. The other is a plan. That afternoon, my phone rang. "Olivia." I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice sounded quiet. "Grandma, can I come over?" "Of course." "Today?" "Anytime." She arrived an hour later. When I opened the door, I immediately noticed something. She looked exhausted. Teenagers usually carry energy. Olivia carried worry. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded. But she wasn't. I made hot chocolate. We sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked, "Are Mom and Dad getting divorced?" The question surprised me. "No." She looked down. "They fight all the time." My heart sank. "Since when?" She shrugged. "A while." "About what?" She hesitated. Then she whispered, "Money." I suddenly remembered David's face, the fear, the desperation, the visit. Olivia stared into her cup. "Dad yells a lot now." I felt sick. "What does he say?" She looked uncomfortable. "Mostly about bills." I remained silent. Then she said something that changed everything. "I heard them talking about you." I looked up. "When?" "The night after your birthday." My chest tightened. "What did they say?" Olivia began twisting the napkin in her hands. "I wasn't supposed to hear." "It's okay." "No, it isn't." Her eyes filled with tears. "Dad said you were being selfish." I remained quiet. "Mom said you would calm down." Another pause. "Then Dad said you had plenty of money." The room became completely still. I felt my heart beating. "What exactly did he say?" She swallowed. "He said someday it would all belong to Mom anyway." For several seconds, I could not speak, because hearing it from David was one thing. Hearing it from my 16-year-old granddaughter was something else entirely. Olivia continued, "He said you didn't need such a big house." The exact words, the same words, repeated, again and again. She looked at me carefully. "Grandma." "Yes." "Is that why you're upset?" I took a deep breath. "Partly." She began crying. "I didn't know." I moved beside her. I held her hand. She looked so young, so confused, caught between adults who had made terrible choices. "I heard Dad say something else." I felt cold. "What?" She looked down. "He said maybe you should move somewhere smaller." My stomach tightened. "And Mom?" She didn't answer. Another silence. Then Olivia whispered, "He said people your age belong in retirement communities." I closed my eyes. Suddenly, dozens of old conversations returned. David discussing condos. David discussing smaller homes. David discussing maintenance. At the time, I believed he was concerned. Now I understood. He was planning. Maybe not openly. Maybe not immediately. But the thought had been there. The possibility. The house. The inheritance. The future. Olivia continued quietly. "I got scared." "Why?" "Because they talked about it like you weren't there." That sentence broke my heart. Not because of David, because of Karen. My daughter sat beside her husband while he discussed my future as if I were furniture, as if I were a problem to solve, as if I had already disappeared. Olivia wiped her eyes. "I miss Grandpa." "So do I." "He wouldn't let anyone talk like that." "No." Richard would never have allowed it. He would have stopped it immediately. He would have protected me. Even now, somehow. He still was. After a while, Olivia asked something unexpected. "Are you rich?" I laughed softly. "Why would you ask that? Dad says you have more money than people think." I looked at her carefully. "What do you think?" She shrugged. "I don't care." I believed her, because 16-year-olds care about friends. School, dreams, not inheritances, not estates, not retirement accounts. I smiled. "The money isn't important." She looked surprised. "Then why is everyone fighting? The honesty of children is painful, because they ask questions adults avoid." Why? Why indeed? Why had money become more important than kindness? Why had inheritance become more important than gratitude? Why had my daughter forgotten who I was? I didn't have answers. Only sadness. Before Olivia left, she stood beside Richard's photograph. She smiled. "I wish Grandpa were here." I walked beside her. "So do I." She turned toward me. Then she said something that nearly made me cry. "I think he would be on your side." I kissed her forehead. "I think so too." After she left, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt quiet, but now I carried something new. The truth. Not suspicions, not fears. Truth. David had discussed my future. David had discussed my house. David had discussed my money. And Karen had listened. Perhaps she had not agreed. Perhaps she had remained silent. But silence can hurt as much as words. That evening, my phone rang. "Karen." I answered. Her voice sounded tired. "Did Olivia come over?" "Yes." A pause. "Did she say anything?" I looked at Richard's photograph. I thought about the kitchen table, the tears, the truth. "Yes." Karen became very quiet. "What did she tell you?" I answered honestly. "Enough." Silence. Then I heard her breathing, and for the first time since the birthday dinner, my daughter sounded afraid. Not afraid of losing money. Not afraid of David. Afraid that her own daughter had finally seen the truth. The morning after my conversation with Karen, I woke up feeling tired. Not physically, emotionally. For weeks, every conversation had been about money, inheritance, disappointment, or betrayal. I missed normal things. Coffee with Richard, Saturday mornings, family dinners that felt safe. I sat beside the kitchen window and watched the leaves fall across the backyard. October was nearly over. Winter would arrive soon. At 67, you begin measuring life differently, not by years, by seasons, by holidays, by how many Christmases remain. My phone rang around 10. "Olivia." "Grandma." "Good morning." "Sweetheart, can I come over again?" I smiled. Of course. When she arrived, she carried a backpack. At first, I thought she planned to stay only an hour, but she placed the bag near the stairs. "Mom and Dad are fighting again." I felt my stomach tighten. "Today?" She nodded. "Last night, too." I led her into the kitchen.
We made grilled cheese sandwiches, just like we used to when she was little. For a while, neither of us discussed her parents. Instead, we talked about school, her history class, her college dreams, her favorite books, and slowly, the frightened teenager disappeared. The little girl returned. After lunch, we sat in the living room beside Richard's old chair. She picked up one of his photographs. I barely remember his voice. That sentence broke my heart. Richard had adored her, and now only fragments remained. I stood and walked toward the bookshelf. Inside one drawer, I kept old video recordings, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family vacations. I found one, Richard teaching Olivia how to fish. We watched it together. Richard laughed. Olivia laughed. The younger version of Karen stood nearby smiling. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Olivia whispered, "Mom used to be different." I looked at her. Yes? What happened? Children always ask the hardest questions. I answered carefully. People change. Did Dad change her? I hesitated, because the truth was complicated. I think life changed her. She looked down. Dad gets angry a lot. I nodded. He wasn't always like that. Her eyes filled with tears. Sometimes he talks about money all night. Does he yell at you? She shook her head. No. That relieved me. But he yells at Mom. The room became quiet. I suddenly realized how much Olivia had been carrying. Teenagers hear everything. Arguments through walls, conversations after midnight, financial problems, parents pretending everything is fine. She had been living inside their problems. After a while, she asked me something unexpected. Grandma, why didn't you yell at Mom? I smiled sadly. At the birthday dinner, she nodded. I don't know. She looked surprised. I would have. I laughed softly. When you become a mother, you spend many years protecting your children. Even when they hurt you, that question hurt because the answer was yes. Too often, yes. I looked toward Richard's chair. I think I protected your mother for too long. Olivia became quiet. Then she asked, Do you hate her? No. Dad says she's terrified. That surprised me. Terrified of what? She looked uncomfortable. I don't know, but I thought I did. Karen wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't even afraid of losing money. She was afraid that she had become someone she no longer recognized. Later that afternoon, we walked through the backyard. The garden Richard built years ago had nearly gone dormant. Only a few flowers remained. Olivia stopped beside the old swing. Grandpa built this. Yes. She touched the wood. He loved us. He did. She looked directly at me. Do you think Mom forgot? The question stayed between us. I answered honestly. I think she forgot certain things. Like what? How much she was loved. Olivia nodded slowly. Then she said something that surprised me. I don't want money to make me like that. I stopped walking. Because suddenly,
I understood why I had created the trust. Not to punish Karen, to protect Olivia. Money changes people when they believe it belongs to them. But gratitude changes people differently. I put my arm around her. It won't. How do you know? Because you're asking that question. She smiled. That evening, we made dinner together. Simple pasta, salad, bread. Nothing expensive, nothing special. Yet it felt more like family than the birthday dinner ever had. After we ate, Olivia helped wash dishes. Then she looked at me. Can I ask something? Anything? Did Mom know about the money? The question surprised me. I thought carefully. I don't know. She looked relieved. I hope not. Why? Because if she knew... She stopped. What? She lowered her voice. Then maybe she wasn't pretending. Those words broke my heart. Because even Olivia wanted to believe her mother was still the woman she remembered. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma. I love you too. She hesitated. Then, I'm sorry about the birthday. I touched her face. You don't need to carry that. But I was there. So was everyone else. Her eyes filled with tears. I should have stood up. I shook my head. No, that was your mother's responsibility. After she left, I sat alone in the living room for the first time in weeks. I felt peace because despite everything, something good remained. Olivia. Richard's kindness lived inside her. His honesty, his compassion, his heart. And suddenly, I understood that inheritance isn't money. Inheritance is what survives inside people. That night, my phone rang. Karen. I answered. She sounded exhausted. Is Olivia there? She just left. Silence. Then, did she say anything? I thought about the garden, the old videos, the tears, the questions. She misses you. Karen began crying. Actual crying. Not frustration. Not anger. Pain. I don't know how this happened. For the first time, I believed her. Because perhaps Karen herself no longer understood how she had become this person. And somewhere deep inside my daughter, guilt was finally beginning to break through. 3 days after my conversation with Karen, Daniel called. His voice sounded serious. Linda, I think we should have a meeting. I looked up from my kitchen table. What kind of meeting? With Karen. I remained silent. And David? A pause. Yes. I didn't like that answer. Daniel continued. There are misunderstandings that need to be addressed. I almost laughed. Misunderstandings. That word felt far too small. But perhaps lawyers speak gently because they spend their lives around conflict. When, Friday afternoon, I looked out the window. Gray clouds covered the sky. Part of me wanted to refuse. I was tired. Tired of explaining my pain. Tired of defending my choices. But another part of me knew something. This could not remain unfinished. All right. Friday arrived cold and rainy. Margaret drove me to Daniel's office. As we sat in the parking lot, she squeezed my hand. "You don't owe anyone guilt." I smiled. "I know. Do you?" I looked away. "No." She nodded. "Then remember." Daniel had reserved a private conference room, large table, several chairs, a window overlooking downtown. Everything felt formal, too formal for a family. Karen arrived first. She looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes. No makeup, no confidence. She quietly sat across from me for several moments. Neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "Mom?" I nodded. "Karen." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've missed you." The words hurt, because I had missed her too. David arrived 5 minutes later. He looked tense, very tense. Daniel entered behind him carrying several folders. The atmosphere immediately changed. This was no longer a family conversation. This was reality. Daniel sat down. "Thank you all for coming." Nobody answered. He folded his hands. "Mrs. Harrison asked me to facilitate this discussion," David interrupted. "We need to understand what's happening." Daniel looked directly at him. "You will." The room became quiet. Daniel turned toward me. "Linda, would you like to speak first?" I took a deep breath. For years, I had remained silent. For years, I had accepted. For years, I had forgiven. Now I finally spoke. "I spent my entire adult life putting my family first." Nobody interrupted. "I worked extra jobs for Karen." Karen lowered her eyes. "I cared for Richard while he was dying." David looked down. "I helped with Olivia." Silence. "I gave money when it was needed." Karen began crying. "And then my daughter told me to be grateful for scraps." My voice broke. Not from anger, from sadness. Daniel allowed the silence to remain. Finally, Karen whispered, "I'm sorry." Real tears now. Real pain. Not fear. Not negotiation. Pain. She looked at me. I don't know why I said it. I believed that. Because cruelty often comes from habits we no longer recognize. She continued. "I was embarrassed." I frowned. "Why?" She took a shaky breath. "David and I have problems." David immediately spoke. "Karen." She raised her hand. "No." For the first time, she stopped him. She looked at me. "We've been struggling financially." I remained silent. Everything became about money. Tears rolled down her face. The mortgage. The business. The debts. My chest tightened. David shifted uncomfortably. Karen continued. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you." Those words hurt because they were true. Daniel finally spoke. "There is another issue we need to address." He opened one folder. David immediately became nervous. I noticed. Daniel looked directly at him. "Mister, Mitchell, is it correct that your business currently carries substantial debt? David stiffened. This isn't relevant. It is. Karen turned toward him. What debt? He looked at her. The room became silent. Karen's face changed. What debt? David swallowed. The company. How much? No answer. Karen's voice became stronger. How much? He finally said it. About 300,000. Karen stared at him. I could almost hear her breathing. You told me 100? He looked away. The room changed. Everything changed. Karen stood up. What? David rubbed his forehead. The market changed. You lied to me. He became defensive. I was trying to fix it. Daniel quietly opened another folder. There is more. Everyone looked at him. Several weeks earlier, David had contacted Daniel's office. I didn't know this. Karen didn't know either. Daniel placed a printed email on the table. David became pale. What is that? Daniel answered calmly. Your inquiry regarding Mrs. Harrison's estate. Karen turned toward her husband. You did what? David looked trapped. I was asking questions. Daniel continued. You specifically asked whether Linda Harrison had updated her will. The room became silent. Karen looked as though someone had struck her. You called the lawyer. David said nothing. Daniel continued. You also asked general questions regarding estate distribution. Karen's voice trembled. You told me you never asked about Mom's money. David stood. I was worried. Worried about what? No answer? Karen stepped backward. Suddenly, the entire picture appeared before her. The questions, the pressure, the conversations, the interest in my house, the inheritance, the future. David finally spoke. I was trying to protect our family. Karen looked at him. No. Her voice broke. You were protecting yourself. The room became completely silent. For the first time since the birthday dinner, I saw my daughter clearly. Not angry, not selfish, broken. Because she finally understood. She had spent years listening to someone who slowly changed the way she saw her own mother. Perhaps the change began with money. Perhaps with stress. Perhaps with fear. But now she saw the truth. Daniel finally opened the final document. Mrs. Harrison's current estate plan remains unchanged. Karen looked down. Tears continued falling. I understand. She surprised me. She truly did. No arguments, no demands, no requests, only understanding. David looked stunned. You can't accept this. Karen turned toward him. I can. He shook his head. Karen. No. For the first time, she interrupted him. You lied to me. I was trying. You talked about my mother like she was already dead. His face collapsed. Because it was true. Karen turned toward me. Her voice barely whispered. I'm so sorry. I cried too, because sometimes apologies arrive too late, but they still matter. Before leaving, Karen looked at Daniel. Mom's decision stands. Daniel nodded. Yes. She turned toward me, and for the first time in many years, she looked like my daughter again. Not because she expected forgiveness, because she finally accepted responsibility. Part 14. The meeting ended just before sunset. Rain still covered the windows of Daniel's office. Nobody spoke as we gathered our coats. Karen stood near the door. David remained beside the conference table. For the first time since I had known him, he looked defeated. Not angry, not confident, just defeated. Karen finally looked at me. Mom! I turned. She walked slowly toward me. I don't expect anything. Her voice trembled. I know. Tears filled her eyes again. But I need you to know something. I waited. She looked directly at me. I stopped seeing you as my mother. The honesty hurt, but it also healed, because lies had finally disappeared. She continued. I started seeing you as someone who would always save us. I said nothing. I thought there would always be money. Her voice broke. I thought there would always be another chance. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Karen whispered, and I forgot there wouldn't always be you. I finally cried, because that was the truth. Not the money, not the house. Time. Time was the real inheritance. And once it disappears, no lawyer can return it. Karen walked toward the door. Then she stopped. She looked back. I'm leaving David. The room became silent. Even Daniel looked surprised. David stood up. What? Karen wiped her eyes. I'm done. His face turned pale. Karen. No. Her voice became stronger. You lied. I was trying to fix things. You talked about my mother like she was an account. David shook his head. That's not fair. Karen laughed bitterly. Neither was what you did. I watched them. Part of me felt sad. Part of me felt relief. Because for the first time in years, Karen was making her own decision. Not David's. Her own. David looked toward me, almost pleading. Linda. I remained silent. He lowered his head, because there was nothing left to say. Karen left the room. I followed her into the hallway. She stopped near the elevator. For a moment, we stood together, mother and daughter, separated by years, united by pain. She finally said, I don't deserve forgiveness. I answered honestly. No. She nodded. But I want to earn it. Those words mattered. Because forgiveness given too quickly becomes permission. But forgiveness earned becomes healing. I touched her hand. The first physical contact in weeks. She began crying again. I miss Dad. So do I. I think he would be ashamed. I looked at her carefully. No. She looked surprised. He would be disappointed. Tears rolled down her face. But he would still love you. She nodded, because she knew it was true. Over the next several weeks, life changed. David moved into an apartment. Karen and Olivia remained in the house. Financial problems quickly appeared. The business eventually collapsed. Several investments had failed. Debt remained. Karen called me one evening. I had no idea. I believed her. Perhaps she had ignored the signs, just as I ignored signs about her. People often see only what they want to see. She found a job at a medical office. Nothing glamorous, nothing impressive, but honest work. For the first time in many years, Karen paid her own bills. One Saturday morning, she came to my house, not to borrow money, not to ask for help, simply to visit. She carried a pie, store-bought, slightly burned. We laughed. I forgot how to bake. You never really learned. For the first time in months, we smiled together. Not because everything was fixed, because honesty had entered the room. Weeks became months. Winter arrived. Snow covered the yard. Olivia visited often. Sometimes Karen came. Sometimes she didn't. But slowly, very slowly, things changed. One afternoon, Karen stood beside me in the kitchen. She looked around the house. I used to think this place was worth a lot. I smiled. It is. She nodded. But not because of money. I looked at her. She touched one of Richard's photographs. I almost traded all this for something that wasn't even real. What? Security. I understood. Money promises safety, but relationships create it. Karen continued. David kept talking about the future. She looked down, and I stopped appreciating the present. Those words stayed with me, because they were true for many people. We spend so much time waiting for tomorrow that we destroy today. A week before Christmas, Daniel called. The charitable foundation paperwork is complete. I smiled. Thank you. The trust is secure. Good. And your estate. I looked across the room. Karen and Olivia decorated the Christmas tree. Karen laughed. Olivia argued about ornaments. For the first time in years, my house felt alive. My estate remains unchanged. Daniel was quiet. Are you certain? I watched my daughter carefully place Richard's favorite ornament onto the tree. She looked older, sadder, wiser. I am, because consequences matter. Love had returned. Trust was beginning, but inheritance is not forgiveness, and forgiveness is not forgetting. Christmas Eve arrived. Snow covered the streets. The fireplace glowed. Olivia sat beside Richard's old chair. Karen prepared dinner. Simple food, nothing fancy. At one point, she carried my plate to the table. She placed it in front of me. Fresh food, warm bread, my favorite tea. Then she quietly said, "You never deserved scraps." The room became silent. Tears filled my eyes. Because some apologies arrive months later. But when they come from truth, they matter. I reached for her hand. For the first time since the birthday dinner, I held my daughter's hand. Not because everything had healed, but because healing had finally begun. And somewhere, I hoped Richard was smiling. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow disappeared from the yard. The trees behind my house began turning green again. For the first time in many months, I opened the windows and let fresh air enter the house. Something inside me had changed too. Pain had not disappeared. Disappointment had not vanished. But the weight had become lighter. One Saturday morning, Karen arrived early. She carried coffee. Real coffee from my favorite shop. Not because I asked, because she remembered. Small things matter when trust is broken. She sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, we simply drank coffee. No discussions about money. No discussions about lawyers. No discussions about David. Finally, she said, "I sold the SUV." I looked surprised. "The expensive one," she nodded. "We couldn't afford it." There was no shame in her voice, only honesty. "And the house. We may sell it." I nodded. "How do you feel?" She smiled sadly. "Scared." I understood. For years, Karen had built a life around appearances. The large house, the expensive car, the perfect image. Now she was discovering something important. Peace costs less than pretending. Several weeks later, David finalized the business bankruptcy. He occasionally called Olivia. Their relationship remained difficult. Karen filed for divorce. Nobody celebrated. Divorce is not victory. It is simply the moment when people finally stop pretending. One afternoon, Karen and I planted flowers in the garden Richard built years ago. She looked at the empty soil. "Dad loved this place." "He did." She carefully placed a flower into the ground. "I think he would be disappointed in me." I smiled softly. "You've said that before." "Because it's true." I looked at her. "No." She stopped working. "He would be disappointed by your choices." Tears filled her eyes. "But not by you." She began crying. "I don't know how I became that person." I understood the question. Sometimes people change slowly. One compromise, one excuse, one selfish decision, one difficult year, until one day they no longer recognize themselves. I touched her shoulder. "The important thing is that you see it now." She nodded. "I wish Mom from 10 years ago could meet me today." I smiled. She already has. For the first time in months, she laughed. Summer arrived. Olivia graduated from high school. She had earned scholarships. She planned to attend college in Ohio. At her graduation party, she stood beside me. She held my hand. "Grandma." "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying." My eyes filled with tears. Because there were moments when leaving would have been easier. Giving up, walking away, protecting myself completely. But families are complicated. Love is complicated. Healing is complicated. And sometimes staying becomes its own act of courage. During the party, Karen walked toward me. She carried a plate. Fresh food, warm bread, salad, Tea, she smiled. I thought you might be hungry. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because we both remembered the birthday, the scraps, the humiliation, the words. She quietly said, I think about that night every day. I looked at her. So do I. Tears appeared in her eyes. I would do anything to take it back. I nodded. I know. But I can't. No. She lowered her eyes. I don't expect you to forget. I won't. She looked frightened. But I have forgiven you. She looked up, completely surprised. When? I smiled. A long time ago. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same. Forgiveness happened when I stopped carrying anger. Trust returned slowly. One honest conversation. One difficult choice. One changed behavior at a time. Months later, Daniel invited me to his office. Everything had been finalized. The trust, the donations, the charitable foundation, the estate. He handed me the final documents. Any changes? I thought about Karen, the divorce, the job, the tears, the apologies, the rebuilding. I thought about Olivia, her kindness, her strength, her future. I thought about Richard, his wisdom, his love, his warnings. Finally, I answered. No. Daniel nodded. You've made peace with it. Yes, because the estate was never about punishment. It became a lesson. Money should never reward entitlement. Love should never require humiliation. Respect should never be optional. And inheritance should never replace gratitude. One evening, nearly a year after Olivia's birthday, all three of us sat together on my back porch. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Birds moved through the garden. The air felt warm, peaceful. Olivia looked at us. Can I ask something? Karen laughed. That usually means trouble. Olivia smiled. What do you want people to remember about you? Karen looked surprised. She thought for a long moment. That I changed? Then Olivia looked at me. What about you? Grandma. I watched the sunset. I thought about Richard, the marriage, the losses, the birthday dinner, the lawyer, the tears, the forgiveness. Finally, I answered. I want people to remember that I finally learned my own worth. Nobody spoke, because sometimes the most important lessons arrive late. Very late. But they still arrive. As the sun disappeared, Karen reached for my hand. The same daughter who once told me to be grateful for scraps. The same daughter who nearly lost everything. The same daughter who found her way back. I squeezed her hand gently, not because the past had disappeared, because we had survived it. And somewhere inside the house, Richard's photograph still stood beside the window, watching, protecting, waiting, and for the first time in a very long time, I believed our family would be all right. When I look back on everything that happened, I realized the greatest loss was never money.
It was gratitude. As parents, especially mothers, we spend so many years giving that we sometimes forget we are allowed to receive love too. We tell ourselves that sacrifice is our duty. We excuse disrespect because our children are stressed, busy, or struggling. We stay silent because we fear losing the people we love. But love without respect slowly becomes pain. One of the hardest lessons I learned at 67 years old is that boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. They protect our dignity, our peace, and our sense of self. For many years, I believed being a good mother meant always saying yes. Yes to money. Yes to favors. Yes to sacrifices. Yes to being overlooked. But true love does not ask us to disappear. My daughter lost her way. She confused security with love. She assumed tomorrow was guaranteed. She believed her mother's devotion would always be waiting, no matter how she behaved. And perhaps many of us have made that mistake at some point in our lives. What saved our family was not money. It was truth. Truth hurt. Truth exposed painful things. Truth ended illusions. But truth also opened the door to healing. I did not restore the inheritance. Some people may disagree with that decision, but forgiveness does not require surrendering your boundaries. Loving someone does not mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. And sometimes, the greatest gift we give our children is accountability. My husband Richard once told me, "Don't spend your life taking care of people who stop appreciating you." I finally understood what he meant. The greatest inheritance we leave behind is not money. It is kindness, character, respect, and the courage to know our own worth. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, please remember this. Your love is valuable. Your sacrifices matter. Your life has worth beyond what you can give to others. And it is never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If you were in Linda's position, would you have changed the will? Have you ever felt taken for granted by someone you loved? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every message, and your stories may help someone else who feels alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these journeys together. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It always reminds me that none of us are truly alone. Thank you for being here.